Hello and welcome to DVD 1. On this DVD I'll be looking at how to play the modern Italian game. That's 1e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6 and now bishop c4. A move that is as old as the hills, rapid development, eyeing f7 being the order of the day. But White's idea is much more subtle than just a naked attempt to down black with a quick attack on his weakest point at the start. In volume 1 then we're going to be looking at the classical Italian game, which starts with the move bishop c5. I'll also be considering the Hungarian defence, which is a solid but passive way to play for black as well. In volume 2 of the series I'll be looking at the two knights defence. And well, of course, this is a much more complicated and aggressive way to play with black. There I'm recommending the interesting, to say the least, move knight g5. The two DVDs will hopefully provide something of a contrast for you in terms of a repertoire. Because against the modern Italian game, going back to this particular volume, first of all White plays c3, which seems to feint at playing d4. Black generally counters with knight f6, and now the characteristic move d3, which has become very popular in modern times. This might look like a very quiet move, but actually White's position packs a surprisingly big punch if black even goes slightly wrong. Many grandmasters have used d3 with success. It has appeared in numerous World Championship matches. This move was out of fashion for a long time. In fact, the whole modern Italian game more or less died a death back in the early part of the 20th century because, you know, it was felt that black just simply had too much freedom in this position, too much choice of what to do. But then many strong grandmasters started to re-evaluate White's chances, and of course the Ruy Lopez was one of the main reasons for the lack of popularity of this opening. And certain positions from the modern Italian game are very similar to the Ruy Lopez, where White just plays in a more restrained fashion with d3 rather than play d4 straight away. Going back one move, we'll also be taking a look at queen e7, which again I would put in the category of solid but passive moves, although it is played from time to time. It was a favourite with Alexander Alekhine a long time ago, but hasn't been seen much since then. And we'll look at the passive d6. In general, against passive moves, White should change his plan and try to play with d4 as quickly as possible. That's what the move c3 is all about after all. It's just that in the modern Italian game, sometimes White defers this move to a more propitious moment. He doesn't play it straight away. So that's the intro. It's time to look at some games. And I think you'll find yourself picking up this system very quickly as we go through the games. Okay, well now it's time to go straight into the games. My first game comes from the World Under-16 Olympiad, which was played in Turkey in November 2010. It's from the Russia-Turkey match, and is an absolutely classic example of what White is trying to achieve when he uses the modern version of the Italian game. It's between Yuri Eliseyev and Igor Koksal. Okay, well White kicked off with e4, black played e5, and now White played bishop c4. This is obviously the bishop's opening, but it can quickly get back into our featured line if black plays knight c6, let's say. White goes knight f3 and black plays bishop c5, reaching the classic position for the gioco piano. Now my recommended move order is to continue with the normal move, which is c3. This leaves black wondering whether White's going to play d4 or not in one turn. In order to challenge that, black normally plays knight f6. He sets up counter pressure against the pawn on e4. And now I recommend the move d3. I think this is the best way to get into the Italian game, the best way to get the type of position we want, and restricts black's options. Black castled in this game, White castled too, and now black plays d6. Bishop b3. Alright, well this is a move order I'm sure you will have to get used to if you play the Italian game in this guise. And it's worthwhile now just detailing what White is trying to do. In essence, this is a kind of Ruy Lopez position, albeit in a very unusual guise. quite often in the Ruy Lopez, you wouldn't necessarily see black's bishop on c5 at this stage. And whenever the bishop stays on c5, black's always got to wonder, is white threatening d4 or not? So basically, your first idea is to look out for the right moment to play d4. I mean, you may not play it at all, but there will be some instances, for instance, if black attacks f2 with a knight, or if he gets particularly free play with his pieces, that you may need to play d4 to restrict that bishop. So d4 is on the cards and probably will come with gain of time. Another move to watch out for in this position is bishop to g5. In the closed Ruy Lopez, with the black bishop on e7, this move doesn't have a great deal of impact. But in this particular position, I think you can see that that pin could be rather awkward for black. So definitely you should be watching out for this move as well. Finally, I think white's overall plan in this position is to obtain a nagging edge and to turn that edge into ultimately a kingside attack, rather in a similar way to the closed Ruy Lopez. So for instance, white can be considering moves such as h3, rook to e1, and then the traditional transfer of the knight on b1 in Ruy Lopez fashion towards the kingside. For instance, knight d2, knight f1. And when the knight's on f1, white can then choose between going to g3 or coming to e3, dependent on circumstances. Ultimately, the knight's destination would really like to be f5 or d5. I think the knight on f5 or d5 could well put severe pressure on black's position if it was played at the right moment. And hopefully, after the knight manoeuvre, white can translate this strength on the king side into a direct attack. Well, okay, those are his plans, I would say, in this position. Black played a6. Now, this was a move which Korchnoi made very popular in a couple of games he played against Karpov in the World Championship match. I think it was back in 1981, if I'm not mistaken. And the idea of this move is simply to drop the bishop out of the centre, away from the advanced d4. It's a kind of prophylaxis. So, as you saw on the last move, white played knight bd2. And now white's looking to organise his play in a different way. He's not looking to play d4 anymore, I would say, for a while. Instead, I think the traditional plan of manoeuvring in Ruy Lopez fashion comes very much to the fore. And this is what Eliseev does here. h3 cuts down on black's activity. Knight e7 was played, and now white went through with the main idea. Rook e1, knight comes to g6, and now white brings his knight back to f1. Now, in the open game, you could say that black never really achieves a free position unless he can get the move d5 in. Now, I'm not sure that's so true here when his bishop's outside the pawn chain. If that bishop was locked in on e7, or in fact hadn't moved on f8, then yes, perhaps d5 would be the prescription. But the thing about this position is black lacks significant counterplay. Whereas white's idea is very clear. I mean, white's probably going to play, I would say, knight g3 and then put the knight on f5. And then wait for black to actually do something. White may also play d4 in this position. It seems to me white has the greater choice of plans here. And this is a very common theme in the modern Italian game, the system that we are adopting. We're restricting black's play. We're building up this edge in space, in manoeuvring possibility, and then we're going to turn that into a direct attack, hopefully. Coxau becomes a little bit impatient here and plays his knight to h5. He thinks at one stroke he's stopped really the impact of bishop g5, and bishop g5 could well have been a move, and he's planning to occupy f4. The knight will come into f4, the queen will come out to f6, maybe black will even sacrifice a piece on h3. So by these means, black is hoping to work up a big attack himself. Now white plays a very characteristic move, d4. If black is playing on the edge of the board, white reacts in the centre and creates counter pressure on the pawn at e5. Well, this doesn't seem to stop Coxall in any way, shape or form. He just puts the knight on f4. He thinks e5 is protected, queen f6 comes next, and there might be a sack on h3 coming up. White plays knight g3. Of course, white still has fairly substantial edge here because he's got the centre. And these central pawns are very restricting from black's perspective. Added to which, white has actually set a remarkably cunning trap, which black falls straight in for when he plays queen f6. Now, well, from my perspective, that is the natural move in this position. But white uncorks a really stunning move here, knight to h5, and immediately black is put on the back foot. The point of this move is clear. If black takes that knight, white is going bishop g5, and that's the end of black's queen. That is quite a nice trap. You know, I could just see myself falling for that trap, funnily enough, because it's quite unusual. You wouldn't believe a board which is full of pieces that suddenly the queen could be so restricted, but it turns out that it is. So black has to beat the retreat here, and he goes back with queen e7. But now white does work up a big edge simply by taking twice on f4. Now he really is in charge of the centre, and queen d2 emphasises this advantage. The pawn at f4 is very, very weak. If black plays queen f6 in this position, he runs straight into e5. Basically, white is really getting to grips with the position before black gets mobilised. Now that pawn on f4 starts to look very, very weak. So Coxall's remedy is, well, desperate in a way, but perhaps he couldn't see how else to protect that pawn. He's hoping that white can't get at his ragged kingside now, but white breaks through very nicely with the move e5. And please note, this bishop on a7 is locked out of the game by the pawn at d4. This is a very thematic idea. Well, black tries to shut up shop there on the king side, and now white turns his attention to the light squares with queen to d3. Black plays king to g7, intending to answer bishop c2 with, I think, rook h8. And then maybe black's hoping to hang on. But white finds a better plan. Going back to the game, he plays rook e2. His idea is to concentrate fire in the e-file. So quite naturally, black tries to shut the e-file. I mean, if he kept the e-file open, I guess white would just penetrate to e7. There is another plus point to c6. Of course, it lets the bishop out. The bishop can now come back to b8. But the trouble is, black's queen side is very underdeveloped in this position. I guess that's one of the basic problems that black has to solve in the open game in general. You know, if you lag with queenside development in the open game, you can often come into a position like this where every single white piece is participating in the attack, but, you know, black has three pieces out of the game. What is his rook doing on a8? Or either of his bishops, for that matter. So black is in real serious trouble. Rook h8 is the prescribed antidote to queen h7 check, but now white fashions a classic breakthrough. I mean, this was coming, and I don't think black could stop it. Devastating move. It's a decoy. This pawn is being decoyed away from g6, so white can land a serious check on that square. Well, black forces white to sacrifice the exchange to achieve this check, but the check comes nevertheless, and black can't defend this position. No way. White is attacking him with a queen, a rook and a knight. Black's only defending with the queen. Both of black's rooks and bishop on a7 are completely helpless to stop this attack. So the game really ends very swiftly now. Queen f5 check, king g8 and now rook g6. Completes a very well played game by Eliseev. That is a good place to start our investigation. It's quite an inspiring win for white and quite thematic too. A number of key ideas were presented there, ideas which will crop up a lot. Actually, you know, I find this opening very, very suitable for club players. Simply because black has no clear route to equality. It's not as if the theory of this opening is particularly well developed. It's almost as if both players from an early stage in the game are just playing, you know, with ideas and off the top of their head. Because, you know, this is not the type of opening which lends itself to long theoretical variations. it's more a quiet game at the outset, where both players just try to get their pieces out. And it seems to me that White's choice of plans is slightly greater. His position has more potential here than Black's does. Although, of course, Black has won his fair share of games from this situation. Nevertheless, draw your own conclusions from the following game, which comes from the Lithuanian Championship, which was played in April 2010 between Julius Garnelius and Viktoras Galushchak. It's the same type of game as last time, except that Black makes a minor imprecision in the opening. Almost imperceptible. You may not even notice it as we go through the opening moves. But White makes him pay for this imprecision. And this will be, therefore, another very instructive game. Well, as we saw in the last game, Black steps away out of the centre to dissuade White from playing d4. Probably Black's going to follow this move up with something like bishop g4. However, I think if we just go back, Black would probably have done better just to play a6 and retreated the bishop all the way to a7. We'll see why in a minute. Probably Black doesn't sense the danger at this moment in time. That's my perception of events. So Garnelius just builds up slowly. He makes room for the knight on b1 to come across to f1. And now Black goes through with the same idea we saw in the last game. He manoeuvres the knight to g6 in the hope that, he may start a kingside attack. However, it's here that White takes advantage of Black's move order by playing the excellent move knight c4. I think White's only going to actually nab one of Black's bishops in this position. That's the problem for Black. It might not seem like too much of a gain. I mean, the positional threat, I suppose, is a4. That's White's main threat when he puts the knight on c4. That threatens to win the bishop outright, I think, or at least cause the bishop severe embarrassment. And if Black plays a6 or a5, White would simply take that bishop off on b6. White would then have the two bishops and this nagging edge that we are looking for. Well, in the game, Galushchak chooses a rather simplistic way of playing the position, but I think already White is better because of this move knight c4 and because of the inability of Black to preserve his bishop pair. So bishop e6, White played the excellent move d4, pressure on in the centre. Black took on c4, White recaptured, Black took on d4, White captured with the knight, and now Black thought he was freeing his game by playing d5. But in reality, all Black is doing is actually opening up the game for White's two bishops. So from a small edge, now White's advantage starts to grow, and grow significantly. Basically, Black has no opponent to White's light square bishop. Jeremy Silman, in one of his more famous books, I think How to Reassess Your Chess perhaps, talked of imbalances in a position. You look for imbalances and then you try to work with them. One imbalance that I see in this position is that White has a light square bishop which can't be opposed, and Black has a knight in the centre. Which of these two pieces has the better potential? Well, of course, it has to be the bishop on c4. So White, quite correctly in this game, tries to emphasise the power of this bishop by playing queen f3. And Black must keep the knight in the centre. If he retreats the knight, it'll just be worse. Let's just verify that. If he goes knight f6, I mean, you're already running into moves like bishop g5. And if bishop takes d4, I'm not even sure that White can't go rook a d1 in this position. Bishop takes f2 check and just take it. Black could be in a terrible mess very quickly in this position because of his lack of development of the rooks. White is operating with two extra rooks in play, and he's going to get his pawn back. And he's driving the Black queen a horrible square. So Black, I think, going back to the game, correctly keeps his knight in the centre, but the pressure now really starts to build as White plays his knight into the very thematic square f5. In general, in this opening, if you can manoeuvre a knight into f5, then the chances are you're really starting to put the heat on Black's king. And it's one of the overall aims of this opening, I would say. Knight from b1 to d2 to f1 to either g3 or e3, and then into f5. I mean, here, White has even found a way for the f3 knight to come into f5. This is paradise for White, I would say. Black seizes the only chance he's got, really, to exchange off the knight. I mean, if he leaves the knight on the board, it's just going to kill him. So quite correctly, I think, black exchanges off the knight, and now, of course, black's attacking the bishop on c4, along the fourth rank. But white just grabs the knight on d5. Pawn takes, and now g3. Coolly defending himself. Black's got this big, juicy weakness on d5, and no way to get rid of it. Now, in positions where a player has an isolated queen's pawn, the general rules are as follows. The person with the isolated queen's pawn understands that this is a game-long weakness. So he's either got to be very active to compensate for the pawn weakness. In other words, he's got to keep his pieces on aggressive squares to prevent white from just simply taking the pawn. Or he's got to try and get rid of the weakness. Now here, black can definitely think about playing d4 at the right moment to get rid of this weakness. Or can he? Because white now plays another excellent move, bishop e3. I think however way you look at it, black is going to end up a pawn down in this position. When the d pawn advances, b7 becomes weak. Black has no way to relieve the pressure. So Goluschek probably thought to himself, okay, let's try and take a few pieces off, bail out into an endgame. Major piece endgame, you know, if I can keep active I might hold the draw. Well, no such luck as white trains his sights on the poor d pawn. I mean, black tries his best. He puts his rook on e4. That blocks the queen out of the game for a little while. But white's position is so rock solid, you know, it's characteristic of this variation. Black keeps an eye on the pawn on d5. White just doubles up. White's position is as safe as the Bank of England. You know, there's no way in for black. Ultimately, black is just going to lose this pawn. And that will be that. You know, a pawn down. If your technique's not good enough, so be it. But almost imperceptibly, black has drifted into a lost position. And that's the way it can happen in this particular opening. So Goluschek just tries to play some natural moves. White does a bit of gardening at the back. He plays king g2. And now black tries to liquidate by playing d4. Obviously, if black had played rook to e5 in this position, white just takes on d5 with a clear pawn up in the endgame. I mean, this should be an easy win. Well, perhaps not an easy win, but it should be a win. You settle for a pawn up at the start, wouldn't you? So going back to the game, black plays d4. Okay, that's another pawn down the drain. Takes, takes. And now you see the move black wants to make is something like rook e2 or queen e2. But he can't because of his back rank problems. So he plays g6 to give his king a bit of air. White plays c4 and black had enough. He actually resigned this position. This showed quite a bit of respect for the opponent. Okay, the guy with white was several hundred elo points higher rated than his black opponent. Maybe you wouldn't resign this position, but it's really bad. I think white is just going to penetrate to the 7th rank with his rook. If black doesn't play a move like queen c6, well, I mean, after queen c6, I suppose the simplest way is just to take it and go rook d7. This should be a fairly easy win. As far as I can see, I think white is winning another pawn in this position. So that was that. Another effortless win for white. And black really didn't seem to do too much wrong in that game, yet lost in 28